Hi guys, Ryu here, and in this video we're gonna be talking about probably one of the most important things, and it's lighting. Without lighting, you don't exist. You don't have any renders, you don't have any portfolio. Lighting is everything, and you really need to know your lighting, okay? That's essential. I see a lot of really good artists, and they produce just fucking disastrous renders, and it's a shame because, it's a skill you need to have. It's no excuse, yeah? So first of all, what is lighting? What is good lighting? Good lighting is well balanced lighting. Just like when you balance composition, you need to balance your lighting. But also lighting has a purpose, okay? It can tell a story. It can be dramatic, it can be soft, it can be, direct, it can be indirect. There's a lot of different types of lighting, okay? Now you can compose with light because without light you can see nothing. There's blackness. So you're composing with light and shadows, right? So you manipulate with light to create interesting and pleasing looks of your model. Let's talk about basic light setups, okay? So if I'm going to place my model somewhere here in the middle, okay? And I'm going to place my camera somewhere here, right? This is gonna be my camera, okay? Pointing this way, all right? So now the most basic light setup would be from 45 degrees pointing this way. Or 90 degrees, pointing this way. So somewhere, in this cone, yeah. Okay, this will be cone of light from which direction you'll be shooting with light. You don't want light to go, directly above your lens because that will produce awful results. Have you ever seen pictures taken by these compact cameras which have a flash built into the lens, like near the lens? So when your flash is near the lens, one of the problems is the red eye, but the other one is very flat shadow. So when you look at a picture like this, you will see an example of an extremely flat image because the light is overlapping with the direction of the lens, right? To create an interesting game of shadows and textures, you need to have an angle of a light, okay, that's going to be different than the angle of a camera, right? That's one. So, for example, when you go to, any image really, let me just give you a good example here, a really good example. There you go, this one. It's my self-portrait. It's a funny one. So you see that here when the light falls at a really steep angle, okay, it's about 90 degrees. You can see that the shadows are very well defined everywhere, right? So you want this angle of light to be, really interesting, right? Not boring, okay? But interesting, right? Second thing is that you may use more than one light. Because, for example, what you might want is a rim light or backlight or kick light that's gonna be, counteracting the main light, all right? So if you go again here, you can see this in almost all the photos. Like this is a rim light, it's sun, so I'm shooting against the sun, and I'm using strobe to light her face in a very kind of like a smooth and delicate way, right? The light is soft here, and this one is very hard from the sun. We're gonna talk about hard and soft light in a minute. You really want to have some kind of like a background separation, and this is achieved by using, a backlight, okay? And there's a really good example here. This is a fantastic example as well. It's one of my favorite photos too. There's a beautiful rim light here from the sun, right? And there's a very soft light here. Like the light on her face is so close, it's almost touching her face. It's like maybe 10-20 centimeters away from the face. That's so close, right? To create this very soft light effect, right? But you have this rim that separates everything. And you can apply the same thing to your models. So for example, here, you see I'm shooting against the light, right? So the bot is lit, but the light in front of it is much stronger, which is why you get this beautiful rim and glow, right? In here is the opposite. Light from the front is stronger than in the back, but there's still separation, right? Let's say, for example, here you got also very strong lighting from the back because you got these halogens here, right? And you can see that the silhouette is very strongly cut out from the background because you got light from the top, from this side, and from the back, right? So literally from any direction, but the lighting is very directional, very strong. So it highlights specific parts of a model, right? Same in here, you can see there is a rim light on this element, right? So that's how it works, okay? And sometimes you got a flat light. We show you a good example of a flat light. This one is extremely soft light, right? There's almost no directional shadows. It's very bland, which is exactly what I wanted because the form of the gun is quite complex. So I didn't want to add more drama. I just wanted to, you know, to just be quite calm. But this is a very calm light, yeah, very soft. Whereas, for example, you know, light in here is very directional, very strong, right? Same in here because it's sunset, you can see only the rim. So it's mainly the backlight. There's a bit of light on the ship, of course, to highlight, you know, the details, but most of the light is in the back of the ship, so it's a backlight. It's a backlit object, which is how you can, you know, achieve an effect of a silhouette. You can have three lights. You can have another one, for example, here to, you know, to highlight this side. So the front's going to be really well lit, and then you're going to have a kick light, okay? Another way of lighting is going to be clamshell lighting, which is lighting from a top and a bottom. So if you have a camera, and this is, for example, someone standing here, right? Facing this way, okay? You can have light from a bottom and from a top. And that's called clamshell lighting because it clams, kind of like a clam, right? Wraps up the person. And if you go to examples, oh, there you go. That's a typical clamshell lighting, okay? You see? There's a top light. And the top light's gonna cast shadows underneath her eyebrows, right? But the bottom reflector negates that, so there's no shadow under the chin, under the lips, under the nose. Is all, you know, beautiful. If you remove that, right, you're gonna have shadows. If you look, for example, for like old Hollywood portraits, you'll see there's a very characteristic. I think it was 60s. Let me see that. Was it 60s? There was like a very characteristic shadow under the nose. There you go. See that? That's a light from the top mainly. And you see like there's a very strong jaw shadow here. So that's a light from kind of like a front top. But definitely not clamshell lighting. So it was very common for that era, okay? For the movies. You see how strong the light is? It's a very strong light. Very well-defined lighting. So there you go. Another way of lighting would be lighting from the top, you know, just from the top, okay? Right? So I got this example here in this model. This would be one, okay? That's lit from the top and from the bottom. It's actually very kind of like a horror-like lighting. When you light from the bottom, you can see there's a rim in here and shadow on the top of a nose, so the light goes from the bottom but also from the top. So it's kind of clam but in a different way. It's a clam light, but it's sort of retracted behind the model, so it doesn't highlight the entire face, okay? But here this light, okay, it's from the top, and you can see that because you can see where the highlights are. Always look for highlights and shadows. If the highlights are on the top, the light goes from the top, okay? If the highlights are on the right side, the light from the right side, okay? So look where the shadows are and when the light is, okay? So this is coming from the top, right? So it's similar to how they light cars. This is how they light cars professionally, which is why you get these beautiful rims on top of the car, and the bottom is kind of dark and with kind of deep reflections. That's how they shoot cars, okay? So if you look at professional car shoots, that's what you're gonna see. Massive soft boxes with various diffuse light, but they cast light on the top of a car and the bottom is just a silhouette, okay? So that's another way of lighting. And, you know, there are a lot of variations, but, you know, this should do, right? And if you want to adjust the silhouette, just basically use a light from the back and that's it, you know, just a backlight and you're done. So now let's talk about quality of light. There's, you know, we got soft and hard, focus and diffused, all right? Now soft lighting is going to be on an overcast day. Overcast day is going to have a very, very bland lighting, okay? It's actually painting, but you know what I mean. It's a very, very bland light, and it's a great light for portraits and for example, for this kind of a scene, right? This looks like some kind of, I don't know, house in Norway, England, wherever, right? But, you know, it fits the environment. So it's a very kind of diffuse light, you know, there's no direction to any you know, any shadows. It's just all bland because the sky is one massive source of light, okay? It's a one huge softbox. But when you shoot stuff on a sunny day, things start changing because sun is actually an extremely small source of light. Ironically, it's a big star, but relatively to us, it's a small source of light because it's just a small pin, you know, it's like a pinhole in the sky, right? It's very small, okay? So when you shoot on a sunny day, you're gonna get very, very strong shadows and highlights. You see, this is shot during sunset. Her face is of course smoothed out in Photoshop, but if you look at the hair, they're very, very well defined shadows, right? And highlights. And it's the same thing with everything, okay? Look at these shadows, how strong they are, right? Very strong highlights, very deep, and they're very harsh. The transition between the shadow and highlight is like immediate, it's instant. There's no diffusion zone. It's just like cut with a knife, yeah? That you can determine what kind of light you're talking about. I like diffuse light because of my work with portraits. So, you know, most of my renders are very soft, right? It's a soft lighting. I just simply prefer it, but you know, it's up to you what you're gonna go with. It's an artistic choice, all right? Direction of light, important. You know, light can have different angles. The lower the angle of the light, the harder the shadows. And this is why sunset and sunrise are so beautiful, because, you know, all the textures are popping, okay? Sunset textures. There you go. So, this is perfect example. Look at this. See that? See how deep these shadows are? But if this sun was on a sky, right, it would be shining dead straight, down perpendicular to the ground. You will be just seeing no shadows, none whatsoever. So that's what a really sharp angle of light creates. So if you really want to have dramatic renders, you want to have a very sharp lighting, okay? This is, for example, quite dramatic lighting. It's a sunset lighting, you see? It's much more dramatic in terms of the dance of deep shadows and deep highlights, okay? Very bright highlights, yeah? Okay? Then let's talk about light fall-off. Now, there is a mathematical rule. Now, the rule for the light fall-off is basically called inverse square law of light. So I suggest you read about it. And this is how the light falls off. Basically, if you move a light very closely to your subject, okay, so let's draw a light here. You'll need to drop the power of light not to overexpose the subject because light is so close. But because the light, you know, power here is much smaller, it's gonna fall off much more rapidly here, right? But if you're going to move this light further away, you're gonna have to pump up the power up, yeah? So the light's gonna shine much further deep down behind the subject, right? So now the way we use this inverse square law of light is that when you use a light really close to your subject, you don't have to put your power so much, okay? Because the light flow is going to be very rapid behind your subject. But when you actually move your light away from the subject, then you're going to have to pump the power up, which means the light's going to be, you know, affecting a greater area, okay? And we use it to create pitch black backgrounds in a very confined spaces. So, for example, when I shoot I was shooting in my house, and I didn't have much space. I was using a black backdrop in the back. I was using strobes very close to my subject, and the light wasn't even reaching the backdrop, so it's pitch black. So you can use this to your advantage when you work on images. For example, this was shot in a very small space. You can't see the background because it's pitch black. The light simply doesn't reach it. And because I was shooting with strobes, the room is almost pitch black, right? So only the model is lit, and that's it. The light is really, really, really close to her, okay? It's just outside the camera view. So, you know, the same with all these images, right? The light is extremely close to her. The closer, the better, right? And also, you know, the closer you put the light, the softer it's gonna be. So use this one to your advantage. It's an actually very interesting subject, the light fall-off, all right? This is really important. Do not focus on specific object, focus on shapes and game of shadow and highlights, right? When I design my renders, okay, when I try to compose a render, I never think of what I'm shooting, okay? I don't care what it is. All I care about is how my highlights and shadows are playing together, okay? I'm looking at it as a game of shapes. I don't give a shit what I have in mind. I don't care if it's a human, you know, a truck, you know, left piece of someone's hot ass. I don't care. All I care about is that, you know, it's just a game of highlights and shadows, all right? That's all I care about. I want a beautiful, you know, balance of lighting and shadow, and that's all you should be caring about. So stop focusing on what you're shooting, start focusing on how it looks, okay? How your shadows and highlights are being arranged, right? So for example, you think that these diagonal lines here, they're not accidental, okay? All these angles here, they were precisely, I was manipulating with the background until I got these specific angles here going on all around the image, right? Which are gonna be corresponding with the angles on the track, okay? See what I mean? So this is not accidental, guys, you know, it's all designed on purpose, all right? So when you create a lighting, you need to design it. It's not just randomly slapping lights, you know, and thinking, oh yeah, it's gonna be all right. No, just play with it. Take your time and you know, put some thought into it, okay? But most of all, you should study lighting. Rims and kicks. So we talked about it, right? It's a rim light and kick light, which is the same thing. It's very important to separate your subject from the background. So you do that by creating simply rim lights. Now bounce and flags. This is interesting. So for example, when you shoot photography, you're gonna be using bounce light and flags. Flag in photography basically is like a piece of black fabric that's gonna absorb all the light. For example, that's a good example. You see that black fabrics here, and they're gonna absorb all the light. No light's gonna get reflected. That's how you use flags, okay? Now reflector is gonna be the opposite of it, and I use reflectors quite a lot when I shoot stuff. So for example, let's say I'm gonna have some kind of object here, right? Let's just go to a regular view, some object here, okay, and I'm gonna have a plane on the bottom, right? And let's say the light's gonna be coming from this angle, okay? So let's actually make it happen. So let's add a material, and let's add the material, right? And then let's go to my render, and let's connect the HDRI, all right? And let's make this HDRI very directional. So let's go to Kiara Morning, maybe. There you go. That's a directional light, okay? It comes from over there. Yeah, you see that? That's where the light is coming from, right? So what I can do now, right, to highlight this side of the object, I don't need a second light. All I need is a reflector. So I can borrow a plane, right? Change this plane to something a bit more, you know, a bit more bright, like this, right? Now let me show you something cool, yeah? If I turn it on and off, you'll see that this side is gonna get brighter and darker. But in Eevee, this is not gonna work. So let's go to cycles, yeah? Because Eevee's, you know, Eevee's not that accurate. Look what happens. Look how brighter this part becomes, okay? And you can use reflectors to adjust the amount of bounce by simply changing their tone. So make them darker, brighter, right? You can even change the color, and they're gonna cast the color, because light will pick up the color and cast it back on your object. So if you want to make it appear warmer, you can do that with light, right? You can bounce it back. Look, it looks as if it was, you know, if there was an emission on it, right? So you can manipulate with it. So flags and reflectors are an extremely powerful way of lighting stuff in, you know, in anywhere really. And in photography, you very often use bounce light, which means, let's say you got a wall, okay? So you got a wall here on this side, okay? Like this. And you put someone really close to the wall, okay? So let me just move this one to the wall. And you see, the closer I move to the wall, the brighter this is gonna become. You see that? So what we use sometimes is we use flash to bounce against from the wall, but you can use any source of light to bounce it back on the subject, because in this case we're using HDRI, right? To bounce it, you know, on this wall, right? So then you can manipulate with either moving the object or moving the reflector, right? So now reflections is something else, okay? What I want to talk about is reflections. So when you have something really glossy, okay? I mean really glossy, right? So let's make it metallic and really shiny. You're gonna have reflections. So be careful with them, because sometimes reflections are not really that nice, okay? Sometimes you need to tone them a bit down. Like for example here, you see, these are all reflections, right? These are reflections of light. And if you have unpleasing reflections, okay, that they're not really complementing your subject, you're gonna have reflections in incorrect areas, then stuff will start looking really bad, okay? So, you know, be careful with reflections. I don't know if I can find you a good example of crop reflections in my photos. Probably gonna be difficult because I'm very peculiar about it. Like see here, this is really strong, okay? This is really strong. might be even too strong, okay, because it's kind of almost brighter than this, which is not a good idea. I think I should tone it down. These are very old renders. There's the reflection in here as well. It's a strong one too, but this one is actually balanced by these two lights, so that's fine. But this one maybe is a bit too strong, so be careful with reflections. You know, they can be very treacherous, right? Exposure and clipping. Okay, so I talked about it briefly in a different video, but basically when you have an image, right? If you look at the histogram, you don't want to go too high on highlights or too low on blacks. So, you know, good exposure is something that's not washed out, something that's not too dark, something that's actually pleasing to look at. So this is a, you know, histogram should be your guidance, so you don't clip either left or right, but the way you set up contrast is completely up to you. If you create, for example, something like this, you know, this is gonna be bland, okay? That's too bland. You're not clipping anything, but it's just the shadows are too bland. So you really need to work your magic. If you add too much contrast, you do something like this, you'll look like shit. I see a lot of renders like this, they're way too dark, you know, or something like this, barely visible. That is not a good render. You cannot just go to Photoshop and boost the contrast. It doesn't work like this, guys. These, you know, adjustments here, they have to be done manually through, for example, curves. When you adjust gradually, okay, bit by bit. So, for example, pull the highlights up and you drop the shadows down, okay, and you kind of contrast the image this way. And then, you know, for example, you remove it from the darkest tones, not to create, you know, too dark of an image, all right? So you gotta be very careful with these. And see, this is a good way of creating contrast in the image, okay? You're gonna learn how to edit your renders properly to maintain proper exposure, but at the same time avoid clipping and, you know, nasty contrast and so on, right? Game of power of lights, different light, different strength. Okay, that's important. So not every single light should be the same strength, all right? Like I showed you before in my examples, most of my images, they have different strength of lights, okay? All right, here, the main light, which is from the strobe, is of a lower power than actually the light coming from the windows. You can see that the light here on the cheek is stronger than the main light. So the rim light in this case is stronger than the main light, okay? But for example, in this case is the opposite, right? The rim light is very faint, it's almost non-existent. In fact, the only rim light from this image is a bounce from the light. The light is extremely close. I was using this, you know, fall off rule, so the light is bouncing back but gently. It's barely visible here, but you can still see the separation, but it's barely visible because I wanted to focus to go here, right? But then the main light is much stronger than the kick light, okay? So you can manipulate with these two powers and create some different, you know, effects and results, okay? Then, like I showed you in the previous example, you can use color and color cast, so you can color your light, when you can simply put color on the reflector, and the light's gonna pick this color up and bring it with it, okay? So the light picks color, be careful with this, right? Combining lights, you know, you can combine different types of lights. For example, if I combine the HDRI with a sky texture from Blender, okay? So I used HDRI and then I used sky texture to simulate the sun. So you can combine different types of lighting. You can have a, you know, plain light, you can have HDRI, you can have all of them together. I would also recommend highly, okay, when you create lights in Blender using emission, okay? So let's say, let me just delete this. Let's say if I had light here, all right? And this was emissive, okay? So let's put an emission in here, all right? And I wanted to use it as a light. What you want to do is you want to add additional physical light to it to make it look realistic. Otherwise, you're not gonna see highlights and shadows being cast naturally, okay? So you want to make it larger until it kind of fits the same size, okay? So you have emission and then you have additional light, and then when you pump this light up, okay, you're gonna start receiving some really interesting results, all right? I have a really good example on my YouTube when I was creating a tutorial for sci-fi lights, and you can see this how I've done it over there. So go ahead and watch it. And I did the same thing in many of my renders, but I did the same thing here. So all these lamps, they have actually physical light plus emission running on them, right? So the same in here. So, all right, that's important. So that's the last subject, right? Combining light and emission plus physical light. So that's basically it, guys. This is, I think, all you should know about lights, and I suggest you, study this subject diligently, and I would recommend highly studying portrait photography lighting, because this will teach you a lot. Because quite frankly, everything you shoot is a portrait, whether it's a building or a car, it's a portrait. It's a portrait of a thing, okay? Portrait doesn't have to be a person, can be anything. So it could teach you a lot about, how to operate properly with lights, okay? How to use rim lights, how to backlit something, okay? How to create different, maybe atmospheric lights. You see, this is actually the same example. You see this kind of a tiny blob of light here? That's a piece of, this kind of a light concentrated near the center of the light plane. So you got emissive texture in here, plus physical light. And you can see kind of like a bulb, in here, spreading around, right, in this volumetrics. So without this light here, this would not look as interesting. You would not have these interesting shadows here. And then of course you can use volumetrics to make these scenes look much more interesting. I would highly recommend you work with cycles when you can, because the shadows are much more realistic. Eevee is great and can be extremely powerful. Like for example, this was done in Eevee. So you can do some extremely interesting things in Eevee. This was done in Eevee as well. All these images, that's in Eevee as well. So you can do some extremely powerful stuff in Eevee. But cycles is still better. When I render in cycles, just, things are really coming together. So cycle shadows, are just beautiful. They're very natural. So anyway, guys, that's it from me. Hope you learned something cool about lighting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.